We are here in Athens, Greece. Sitting next to me is Alexander Mercouris, and we are going to talk EU 7th sanctions package. We're on number 7 now. Jeez. I thought we already did 7. I thought the EU already did the 7th sanctions package. Anyway, the big topic that everyone is talking about with this 7th sanction package, at least the reports that I'm getting as far as the big topic, and pretty much all that's left, I think, from the EU as far as sanctioning Russia is cutting off the Schengen for Russian travelers. And so that means all Russian travelers, no Schengen visas. Of course, that would destroy the entire Schengen policy, the Schengen structure, because supposedly you get the Schengen visa, you can travel anywhere in a Schengen area EU country. But Latvia, Finland, and Estonia, I believe the 3 countries that are now pushing very, very hard to ban Russian travelers from obtaining Schengen visas, while other countries, and I imagine Greece being one of them, though they haven't come out publicly and said anything, would be very much against this. I would imagine Italy, maybe France, Spain, Cyprus. I imagine quite a few EU countries would be like, this is a bridge too far. But, it would be, if they did cut off the Schengen for Russians, what would that mean from an EU administrative level? I mean, there's a lot of, this would be very damaging to the EU is kind of what I'm thinking. And it would kind of be Russia watching the EU implode even more. But what do you think of the 7th sanctions package and about this idea of cutting off Schengen to Russian travelers?
Right, well, let's start with the fact that they're now going for a 7th sanctions package. So they've tried 6. 6 haven't worked, so now they're going for a 7th. Why do they think that a 7th sanctions package is going to work when the previous 6 have all failed? I mean, they've done everything that they could. They've stopped air flights. They've restricted oil imports. They've de-swifted banks. They've seized the assets of the Russian central bank. They've done everything you can possibly think of. And now they're coming up with yet another 7th sanctions package. And it seems the big topic of discussion. All they can think of now is a ban on issuance of Schengen visas to Russians. Now, the first thing to say is it's not going to make any difference to the Russian military campaign in Ukraine. It's not going to make any significant difference to the Russian economy. On the contrary, what it's going to oblige is Russians to stay in Russia, keep their money there, spend their money there. It's also, I think, going to put a lot of pressure on countries in southern Europe, Greece, Italy, which have made lots of money out of Russian tourists. But when has the EU stopped itself from doing something over the course of this sanctions war that is counterproductive? When has it taken stock and said to itself, is what we're going to do really going to hurt the Russians, or is it going to hurt us? No. Always and invariably, we see hardliners coming up with crazy ideas, and then those crazy ideas being adopted, and everybody intimidated and frightened into voting for them. So there's reports from Spain now which say that the Spanish government isn't keen on this idea. I'm sure the Greek government is not keen on this idea either. I mean, I was talking to somebody from Corfu yesterday, and they're saying, if Schengen visas are refused to Russians, this is going to be devastating for the tourist industry in Corfu. Well, of course, they were already going to be badly affected by the travel bans. So, I mean, it's nonetheless, despite the fact that it's going to do all this harm, I think there's a fair chance that this stupid thing is going to be done. Now, it's not just stupid. We've got to say this, it's ethically wrong. Because this is attacking ordinary Russians now. It's telling ordinary Russians, you are not allowed into the EU, into the Schengen zone. Now, I went through the entire Cold War listening to a relentless propaganda. I call it propaganda, but it's actually justified criticism of the Soviet Union that they didn't allow their people to leave Russia, to travel, to visit Western countries. And now that the Russian government allows Russians to do that, we in the West are now turning round and are preventing Russians from traveling to our countries. We're just doing exactly to Russians the very thing that previously the Soviets did and which we justifiably criticized. And as for the integrity of the Schengen zone, I'm going to make a prediction. I think we're going to start to see the crack up, the further crack, the splintering of the Schengen zone, because I suspect that sooner or later, individual EU countries are going to start quietly giving visas, Schengen visas to Russians. It's going to be very difficult to police this, and some countries are going to become increasingly desperate, and they're going to start issuing those visas. Now, bear in mind, if you have a Schengen visa, you can, in theory, travel anywhere in the Schengen area. So if, say, Finland or Estonia decides that it's not going to grant visas to Russians, people might start getting Schengen visas in, say, Spain, and then traveling to Estonia. I mean, you can see how this could happen. And that would be another splintering of the Schengen zone, and of course, one which would probably be irreversible. But I have to say, I think there's a high chance that this is what they will do, because in an atmosphere, in a climate of hysteria and panic and anger, because things are not turning out as expected, with, you know, the rivers in Germany drying up, with fears of an energy crisis in Europe. When people are angry, they do desperate and reckless and stupid things, and this fits that bill exactly.
Yeah, I made a mistake in the beginning. I said Cyprus, but Cyprus is not in the Schengen.
Well, I know.
So if Cyprus was smart, if our politicians were smart, they would actually capitalize on this, but I don't think they will. I think they'll do whatever the EU tells them, but they could capitalize on this because they're not in the Schengen, and they could go after Russian tourism hard, of course, figuring out the flights and all of that from Russia to Cyprus, given that Ursula von der Crazy closed off the airspace, and Cyprus agreed to that, is a problem. But, you know, if I was the Cypriot government, I would tell Ursula to buzz off, and I would open up the airspace to Aeroflot, but that's me. Anyway, the Estonian prime minister, whose government had collapsed, and then she reconstituted the government, she said that it is a privilege to travel to the EU. I thought that this was kind of a human right, but anyway, she considers it a privilege, which shows you the elitism thinking at work, right? Why? First of all, get into that statement. Second question is, why Estonia, Finland, and Latvia? Why are these countries going so hard? Estonia and Latvia, and Finland for that matter, they must realize that once the United States pulls out their protection from Europe, they're sitting ducks.
Yeah.
In a terrible way, they're sitting ducks, and they're antagonizing their neighbor, their very powerful neighbor. It just sounds so reckless. And then the final question, and we'll wrap up the video, which is a question everyone always asks, which I always think about a lot as well, is why do they hate Russians so much? Not Putin. They hate Russians. Why do they hate Russia so much? Of course, it's a topic that we can talk about for hours, but just give like a couple of minutes explanation as to why they hate Russians so much. On a side note, Alexander, we saw the comedy duo of Lexis and Vovan. They prank called the mayor of Madrid. And the stuff that the mayor of Madrid said about Russian people was absolutely shocking. You had the Norwegian councilwoman about like 2 weeks ago in Murmansk. She said very bad stuff about Russians as well. Why do they hate Russians so much? Has nothing to do with Putin. Has nothing to do with the Kremlin government. Why do they hate Russians? So I gave you 3 questions. Do you remember them?
Absolutely.
Estonia, traveling to the EU is a privilege,
Yeah.
not a human right. Why Latvia, Estonia, and Finland, and why Russians?
Right, the first thing to say about whether or not it's a right or a privilege, of course, during the Cold War, when the Soviets were preventing people from traveling, in those days it was a right. We said that the Soviets were denying people the right to travel. And they were prisoners in their country. The Soviet population, Russian people, were prisoners in their country, imprisoned by their own government. Today, of course, it's a privilege. It's stopped being a right, now it's become a privilege. And the reason it's become a privilege is because this is what we are doing to them. Now, I have to say, travel is not a complete right, because obviously if you're talking about immigration, then countries have a right to restrict immigration to themselves. I mean, this is a well-known aspect, so there's no actual right to emigrate from one country to another. But if we're talking about travel and about going on holiday and such things, well, there is a right under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which says that everybody has a right to a private life. And that's a pretty extensive right. And I would say being able to travel, being able to visit places, to do such things is part of a private life. And I'd say that it is a right. And once upon a time, back as I said in the old days of the Cold War, I don't think that would have been a controversial statement. I think that is what most people in Europe, in the West, would have said. As I said, I can remember all those criticisms of the Soviets, deserved criticisms. I can remember all the jokes that used to be made about it. I remember all the comments, as I said, about the Soviet Union acting as a prison for its own people. Well, we are now locking the door. Now, of course, we're talking about it as a right or as a privilege. We're no longer saying it's a right. We have changed our language as we have changed our attitudes and our policies. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Now, the second point about Estonia and Latvia and Finland. Now, the two things to say is, of course, Estonia and Latvia have very large Russian-speaking populations, and they are extremely sensitive and nervous about them. And of course, people travel between Russia and Estonia and Latvia all the time, and that causes increasing nervousness on the part of the governments of those countries. So there is something of that quality there as well. I think there is that genuine fear that, you know, one day, if lots of Russians come into Estonia, if lots of Russians come into Latvia, they will be swamped by Russians. I mean, they're tiny little countries, very small populations on the fringes of this, you know, great Russian nation. They were part of the Soviet Union, which gives them a legitimate feeling of grievance. And I think there is that nervousness about Russia. Finland is different. And here, I think there is another reason, which is almost the opposite one. Because for most of the time since the end of the Cold War, since the end of the Second World War, relations between Finland and Russia and Finland and the Soviet Union were actually very close. And I think that the Finnish government is now anxious, now that it's decided to side completely with the West, to actually break that connection, sever it once and for all with the Russians by essentially preventing Russian travelers entering Finland. So there is this extraordinary degree of there's different motivations. Estonia and Latvia have one set of motivations, Finland a different one. All of these three countries are, however, doing the same entirely wrong, very, very bad thing, Why do people hate Russians? Now, I don't know that I have a simple and straightforward answer to this question, but I come back to something that Russian writer, that great Russian writer, Dostoevsky once said, which is that we hate those we have wronged. We've done so many things to the Russians cumulatively over the last years, all these sanctions, all these policies, all this abuse, all this criticism. We've broken promises about NATO expansion. We've imposed sanctions on Russia. We've abused the Russian leadership. We've expelled diplomats. We've done all of these things.
Ridiculed them in Hollywood and in media.
Exactly. So it's unsurprising that we worked ourselves up to a state where we've now decided we must hate them. Because how else can we ultimately justify all of these things we're doing? I mean, how can we justify even talking about travel bans unless we actually hate and fear the people who we're doing these things to? That's a very extremely dangerous pathology, I'm going to use that word, to have, because of course when hate and fear and anger start governing policy, then of course it can lead to all sorts of utterly disastrous outcomes, and we've already seen some of them, and there's always the risk that things could get far worse.
Yeah, Dostoevsky. Yeah, he said it best. All right, let's end this video here. And real quick, Alexander, what kind of coffee are you drinking?
Well, I'm drinking a Greek coffee.
A Greek coffee.
Which is, in my opinion, the best coffee you can have. It's absolutely superb coffee. It's, yeah.
That's the Greek coffee.
Greek coffee.
I'm drinking a Freddo espresso. Take care, everybody.